Channel 4 News has learned that the 21/7 bombers are to launch an appeal alleging a cover-up over the scientific evidence at their trial. A former principal scientist at the government's Forensic Explosives Laboratory says he raised concerns before the trial about the reliability of expert findings used by the prosecution. The Crown claimed the devices were viable bombs, but sources have told this programme that the new revelations undermine the case. The four would-be bombers were convicted in 2007 of conspiracy to murder. Our Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel has this exclusive report.
They were always regarded as potential suicide bombers, who, a fortnight after 7/7, had embarked on attempts to maim and murder still further. London was in the grip of widespread fear. They carried their homemade devices in their rucksacks and boarded public transport. The four targeted 3 different tube trains and a bus. When the devices were triggered, there was no explosion, just a bubbling mixture of flour and hydrogen peroxide. At trial, they claimed it was all a hoax, designed to spread fear but not harm. The prosecution insisted the devices were potentially viable, and they showed experiments to support that claim. But a former scientist at the government's Forensic Explosives Laboratory has now come forward to cast doubt over this evidence. Sean Doyle was the principal scientist in charge of a team there. In a witness statement, which forms a key part of the appeal, Sean Doyle says he wants to
set out my concerns regarding some of the scientific evidence presented by the prosecution
at the trial in 2007. He goes on to say he is
specifically concerned about evidence derived from the application of a technique known as isotope ratio mass spectrometry.
This was one of the methods used to determine the viability of the devices. The papers will be lodged at the Court of Appeal behind me tomorrow. They will argue that the convictions are unsafe, and while many might find it uncomfortable, they will raise serious questions about the scientific evidence which helped put the 21/7 would-be bombers behind bars. But the appeal goes further than just questioning the validity of the science behind their convictions. It alleges that doubts were expressed at the time, kept hidden and not disclosed at trial. Mr. Doyle says in his witness statement,
I also expressed my concern verbally to the Metropolitan Police that the methodology employed by
a certain scientist
and the interpretation of the results may not be reliable. I was asked by
a police officer
about
the scientist's
reliability. I replied along the lines that I was not convinced.
Mr. Doyle goes on to say that he expected his view to be reported to the police officer's colleagues at the Met. Sources close to the defence have told Channel 4 News that this amounts to a cover-up. Tonight, a spokesperson at the Crown Prosecution Service told Channel 4 News,
"We take our disclosure obligations very seriously and will be looking into this as soon as we receive details of the grounds of appeal from the defence."
And the Metropolitan Police said,
"We have not seen any papers relating to this application, therefore it would be inappropriate to comment at this stage."
It's not just the Court of Appeal which is being asked to change history. The Criminal Cases Review Commission is also being invited to investigate these claims.
And Simon Israel is with me now. And, of course, you have seen this, the papers from this appeal.
Yes, some of them are here.
And, of course, the big question is, how credible is that appeal?
Right. Well, the 21/7 bombers appealed about a year after they were convicted, and it was struck out. They didn't last. This one's credibility relies on this chap, Sean Doyle. And Sean Doyle was a key player at the Forensic Explosives Laboratory in the run-up to this trial. Both he and his team, as he says in his statement, provided most of the explosives-related scientific evidence at that trial. And he was the one that cast doubt on another expert that the prosecution chose to use. So he's now coming forward, some many years later, having felt troubled by the whole thing and saying, look, things were not right. This raises very, very serious concerns about the validity of that scientific evidence at the time.
Simon Israel.